Welcome to John Carter Stories. I was sitting in the back of Grand Hotel Ballroom. 200 guests an evening were all turning slowly in their seats to look at my son. Daniel stood at the microphone, his prepared speech trembling in his hands. His face flushed a particular shade of red that only comes from public humiliation in a room full of strangers. That is when Margaret Colton, my daughter-in-law's mother, rose from her seat at the head table. She rose the way a person rises when they have never once in their life doubted that the room belongs to them. "Perhaps we should move this along," she said, her voice carrying a precise blend of old money confidence and thinly veiled contempt that takes decades of perfect. "Daniel, darling, we all know public speaking isn't quite your strength. Why don't you simply toast the bride and sit down?" Some of us have actual speeches prepared. The room went silent, not the comfortable silence of anticipation. The excruciating, airless silence of 200 people collectively holding their breath, while one person absorbs a humiliation they did nothing to deserve. I watched my son's face, watched him look to his wife, Sophie, for support. She was staring at her phone, thumbs moving rapidly across the screen. I would find out later she had texted him, "Just sit down. You're making this awkward." My hand moved to my own phone, not to text anyone, not to look away. 35 years investigating insurance fraud for a national firm had taught me something Margaret Colton was about to learn the hard way. Everything leaves a trail. Every lie, every shortcut, every corner cut in the pursuit of wealth and status, every assumption that the rules do not apply to you. I had spent the last 3 months following hers, but I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really started. Please subscribe and like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled. Because what happened in that ballroom in the quiet months that followed is something I suspect more people will recognize than would care to admit. My name is Thomas Mercer. Most people call me Tom. I am 62 years old, retired just over a year from a career that made people's eyes glaze over at dinner parties. Insurance investigation. The kind of work that makes a room go quiet in the wrong direction. My late wife, Carol, used to joke that I could clear a room faster than a fire alarm just by mentioning actuarial tables. She said it with so much warmth that somehow the joke always landed. She was like that. She could make anything feel warmer. Carol died 4 years ago. Breast cancer. It was fast and brutal, and it left me and our son Daniel trying to figure out how to navigate a world that had lost its warmth overnight. She had been the social one, the one who knew how to move through rooms and make people feel seen. I was the numbers man, the detail man, the one who noticed when something did not add up. Daniel took after his mother. He was kind, creative, artistic. He had studied landscape architecture, had built a small but genuine business designing gardens and outdoor spaces in Toronto. It was not flashy work, and it was certainly not making him rich, but he was good at it. He had an eye for the way green spaces make people feel peaceful. He could look at a patch of concrete and see a garden that would make someone breathe differently just by walking through it. He met Sophie Colton 18 months before the wedding at a sustainability conference in Vancouver. She was there representing what she called her brand, a lifestyle influencer with somewhere around 75,000 Instagram followers who posted about wellness, green living, and what she described as conscious luxury. Daniel was there giving a presentation on native plant landscaping for urban environments. They seemed like a good match at first. Both cared about the environment. Both were creative in different ways. Sophie was charming, and she seemed genuinely curious about Daniel's work. When he flew back to Toronto, they kept a long-distance relationship going. Video calls every night. Him flying to Vancouver once a month. I met her for the first time when Daniel brought her home for Thanksgiving 6 months into their relationship. She was polite enough, complimented our house in the Beaches neighborhood. I noticed she photographed her food before eating it and spent most of dinner on her phone, but I told myself that was generational. When I asked about her family, she was vague. My mother is in real estate in Vancouver. My father passed when I was young. I have a younger sister, Natalie. Real estate turned out to be a significant understatement. Margaret Colton owned Colton Properties, one of the largest commercial and residential development companies in British Columbia. The woman was worth somewhere north of $50 million. She lived in a mansion in one of Vancouver's most exclusive neighborhoods, drove a luxury vehicle, and for what I could gather through casual online searches, treated her wealth less like a fortune and more like a divine appointment. I met Margaret for the first time at Daniel and Sophie's engagement party in Vancouver. I flew out alone. Wished Carol had been there to help me navigate what I already suspected would be uncomfortable terrain. The Colton home was everything you would expect. Massive stone and glass, mountain views, manicured grounds, staff in crisp white shirts passing canapes on silver trays. Margaret greeted me at the door with a handshake that barely made contact and a smile that traveled no further than her lips. "Robert, is it?" she said. "How lovely to finally meet Daniel's father. He's told us so much about your work in what was it again? Insurance investigation." "Yes." "How fascinating. And you're retired now?" "Just over a year." "How wonderful." She said the way a doctor says a prognosis is uncertain. "You must have so much time on your hands. Do come in. I'm afraid most of the guests are from our circle, but I'm sure you'll find someone to talk to." She turned and moved into the party, without waiting to see if I followed. I spent that evening watching. It is what I had done for 35 years, and old habits do not die easily. I watched Margaret hold court, watched how she directed conversations, how she steered her daughter toward certain people, positioned her for photographs. I watched Sophie transform in her mother's presence, becoming more performative, more conscious of angles and lighting. And I watched Daniel shrink. My confident, creative son became quieter as the evening went on, laughed less, agreed more. When someone asked about his work, Margaret cut in before he could open his mouth. "Daniel is between projects at the moment. The Toronto market is so different from Vancouver, isn't it? We're hoping he might consider relocating once they're married. Sophie's career really requires her to be based here." Daniel had not told me he was between projects. When I asked him about it later that night at my hotel, he admitted he had lost 2 major clients in the past month. Both had canceled with vague explanations about going in a different direction. He seemed defeated in a way I had never seen him look before. "It's fine, Dad. Things are just slow." And Soph is right. Maybe Vancouver makes more sense. Her work is here. Her sponsors, everything. What about your business? Your clients in Toronto? I can start over. But I heard the doubt underneath it. The resignation of someone who has started to believe someone else's version of who he is. Before I go any further, I want to ask you something. Have you ever watched someone you love start to disappear inside a relationship? Not all at once, but gradually. Like a photograph left in the sun. Drop a yes in the comments if you have ever watched that happen and felt helpless to stop it, because that is exactly where I was in those months leading up to the wedding, and what I was doing quietly in the background while everyone else was planning centerpieces and seating charts is the part of this story that changes everything. I started with a casual search. The kind any father might do when his son is about to marry into a family he does not entirely trust. I typed Margaret Colton's name into a search engine on a Tuesday evening in April, 3 months before the wedding, with a cup of tea going cold beside me and no particular expectation of finding anything dramatic. I was wrong about that. Properties acquired at suspiciously low prices. Development permits approved with unusual speed. Insurance claims that appeared on the public record in a pattern that made the back of my neck prickle the way it had for 35 years whenever something was off. My old instincts kicked in the way a retired surgeon's hands still know how to move. I still had contacts at my former firm, still had access to databases I probably should have relinquished with my employee badge, and I still knew, better than almost anyone, how to follow a paper trail until it told you something the person who laid it never intended you to know. What I found over the following weeks was a masterclass in white-collar crime. Margaret Colton had built her empire on a foundation of insurance fraud, municipal bribery, and creative accounting that would make a forensic auditor weep with a complicated mixture of admiration and despair. The insurance fraud alone was staggering. Over 20 years, Margaret had filed claims on 7 different properties for fire damage, water damage, storm damage. Each claim was filed for just under the threshold that would trigger a detailed investigation. Each was paid out, typically within weeks. The properties were then renovated and flipped for a significant profit. But the dates bothered me. I cross-referenced them against weather records, fire department reports, and city permits. The pattern emerged slowly, the way a photograph develops in a darkroom, shapes becoming edges, edges becoming faces, faces becoming evidence. The storm damage to a Vancouver condominium had occurred on a day with no recorded storm activity in the region. The fire damage to an apartment building happened in a unit that had been vacant for 6 months, with fire department notes suggesting the blaze had been deliberately set. The water damage to a commercial property in Whistler corresponded with a plumbing renovation that had been scheduled weeks in advance. Margaret was damaging her own properties, claiming the insurance money, using that money to fund renovations that drove up the property values, then selling at a profit that had been subsidized by fraudulent claims. It was audacious, and it was criminal. Then there was the bribery. Development permits in Vancouver are notoriously difficult to obtain. Environmental reviews, community consultations, zoning restrictions. Margaret's development sailed through an ease that had no legitimate explanation. I found campaign contributions to city councilors that corresponded with suspicious precision to permit approvals. Consulting fees paid to the relative of a city planning official. A web of financial connections that would have taken a team of investigators months to map. I mapped it in 6 weeks. And the accounting. Properties held in shell companies. Income routed through number corporations. Expenses claimed against developments that existed only on paper. The kind of financial architecture that stays technically legal only as long as nobody looks at it carefully. I had been looking very carefully. By the time I drove the Sea to Sky Highway to Whistler for the rehearsal dinner, I had 63 pages of documented evidence sitting in a folder on my laptop, cross-referenced, annotated, source citations that would hold up in any courtroom in the country. I had built it the way I built cases for 35 years. Methodically, patiently, without rage, without drama, without any of the emotion that would have made the work sloppy. The rehearsal dinner was in one of the Fairmont's private ballrooms. I arrived to find Daniel already there, looking uncomfortable in a suit I suspected Margaret had selected for him. Sophie was radiant in a white rehearsal dress, working the room with her phone out, capturing content. Margaret swept in as if the evening had been arranged in her honor, wearing a dress that cost more than some people's monthly rent, diamonds at her ears, catching the light like warnings. Dinner, prime rib, conversation about real estate that I neither followed nor tried to. I sat between Daniel's cousin from my side of the family and one of Margaret's business partners, a round-faced man named Gerald who spoke exclusively in the language of profit margins. Then came the speeches. Margaret's partner toasted Sophie with extravagant praise about her brand, her influence, her bright future. Sophie's younger sister, Natalie, spoke in the polished cadence of someone who had been coached on what to say. Then it was Daniel's turn. He stood up, unfolded his notes, began to speak, his voice soft, a little nervous. He had always hated public speaking. That he got from me. "See," he said, using Natalie's nickname. "I know we haven't known each other long, but I wanted to say." That is when Margaret stood up. "Perhaps we should move this along. Daniel, darling, we all know public speaking isn't quite your strength. Why don't you simply toast a bride and sit down? Some of us have actual speeches prepared." I watched my son's face, watched the humiliation move across it slowly, like weather. He looked at Sophie. Sophie looked at her phone. She had already turned away. "Right," Daniel said to Natalie, very quietly. "May your marriage be everything you hope for." He sat down. The room erupted in a particular kind of applause that is really just relief. Margaret smiled the smile of a woman who had just done everyone a tremendous favor. I reached for my phone. "I need you to stay right here with me." Because what I did next in that ballroom, in the 45 seconds after my son sat down, is the part of this story that everything else turns on. And the thing I want you to understand is that I was not angry. I was not shaking. I was calm in a way that 35 years of sitting across from fraudsters teaches you to be calm. The kind of calm that is not peace. It is precision. Keep listening. The wedding was everything Sophie had probably dreamed of since she was 12 years old. Flowers covering every surface. A string quartet playing something classical in the mountain air. Whistler's Peaks as a backdrop, the kind of scenery that makes even ordinary moments look significant. Sophie was genuinely beautiful. Daniel looked exhausted in the way of someone who's been holding tension for so long he has forgotten what his own shoulders feel like relaxed. I watched him stand at the altar, watched him say his vows with sincerity that made my chest hurt a little, because I knew something he did not know yet. I watched him kiss his bride, while 200 people applauded, and Sophie's maid of honor held up her phone to capture the moment for an audience of thousands who would never know any of them. Margaret sat in the front row in champagne silk, smiling with the satisfaction of a woman who had organized everything to her exact specifications and seen it delivered without a single deviation. She had no idea the clock was already running. I flew back to Toronto the next morning. Daniel and Sophie were honeymooning in Bali for 2 weeks, a trip Margaret had arranged and paid for. I went home to my routine of morning walks along the lake and afternoon reading, and I waited. The first domino fell 3 weeks later. The Insurance Bureau of Canada announced it was reviewing patterns of claims in the Vancouver commercial property sector. Margaret's name was not mentioned specifically, but I knew how these things work. The public announcement is always the last thing that happens, not the first. The real investigation had been underway for weeks. The second domino fell 2 weeks after that. A national broadcaster published an investigation into development permits in Vancouver, specifically questioning the speed with which certain large-scale projects had sailed through despite community opposition. No names yet, but the properties mentioned were all Colton developments. Daniel called me that night. "Dad, have you seen the news about the Vancouver permits? I might have caught something about it. It's all over Sophie's social media. People are tagging her, asking if her mother's company is involved. Her sponsors are nervous. She's losing followers." He paused. How is Victoria handling it? He meant Margaret. He had always mixed up their names when he was stressed. She's saying it's competitors trying to smear her, that it's all lies. His voice dropped. "But Dad, what if it's not? What if there's actually something wrong with how she does business?" I let the silence breathe. Let him move toward his own conclusion at his own pace. "I don't know what to believe anymore," he said finally. "Believe what you can verify." I told him, everything else is just noise. The third domino was a significant one. It fell 6 weeks after the wedding on a Tuesday morning when I was having coffee in my kitchen. Securities investigators raided Colton Properties offices, seizing computers, files, and financial records. A national news crew was there to film it. By noon, it was the lead story across the province. By evening, the details were coming out in waves. Systematic insurance fraud spanning 20 years. Bribery of public officials. Tax evasion through shell corporations. Money laundering. The estimated scope of the fraud was somewhere between $8 and $12 million. Margaret Colton was arrested at her home. The footage of her trying to cover her face as she was walked to a police vehicle went viral within hours. Sophie's Instagram erupted. Her followers, the brands she worked with, the wellness companies and sustainable fashion labels, everyone wanted to know if she had known, if she had benefited, if she was complicit. Within 48 hours, she had lost 20,000 followers. Within a week, every major sponsor had severed the relationship. Daniel called me from Vancouver. His voice was raw in the way of someone who has not slept and has been crying, and is trying not to show either. "Did you know about this?" "About what?" "About Margaret. About the fraud. About all of it." I could have lied. I could have played ignorant. But I had raised my son to value honesty, and I was not about to stop now. "Yes," I said. A long pause. "How long?" "I started investigating 3 months before the wedding." 3 months. He made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and something much sadder. "You knew and you didn't tell me? Would you have believed me? Would you have called off the wedding?" Silence. "You know what the worst part is?" He said finally. "I'm not even surprised. I mean, I'm shocked at the scale of it. But deep down, I always knew Margaret was off. The way she talked about business, about people, about success, like rules were meant for everyone except her." There was a long pause that felt like him weighing something heavy. "Sophie is a mess. She swears she didn't know about any of it, and I believe her. But she's more worried about her follower count than about her mother potentially going to prison. We had a fight last night. I told her the career built on her mother's money might not be worth saving. She's staying at a friend's place. We're taking some time apart. I want to stop here for just a moment, because I think about that phone call a lot. My son, 3,000 miles away, his marriage already fracturing 4 months after the wedding, his voice sounding nothing like the voice I had heard him use his whole life, and me sitting at my kitchen table knowing that I had set something in motion that could not be unset. Was it the right thing? I believed it was. I still believe it was. But that does not mean it was easy. If you have ever done the right thing and felt the weight of it, drop something in the comments. I want to hear from you. Keep listening. The investigation unfolded the way serious investigations always do. Slowly at first, and then all at once. The insurance fraud was just a beginning. They found evidence of building code violations in Colton developments. Safety inspections that had been falsified. Tenants who had been pressured into leaving rent-controlled apartments so the buildings could be redeveloped. Gerald, the round-faced business partner I had sat beside at the rehearsal dinner who had spoken exclusively about profit margins, became a witness for the prosecution. He testified about kickbacks and bribes with the relieved energy of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time. The city officials who had received campaign contributions developed sudden and convenient memory problems. Margaret's lawyers fought hard, but I had spent 3 months making sure the evidence would hold against exactly that kind of fighting. In November, 5 months after the wedding, Margaret Colton pleaded guilty to 14 counts of fraud, 3 counts of bribery, and 7 counts of insurance fraud. The plea deal kept her from federal prison, but she was sentenced to 3 years in provincial custody, ordered to pay back $8.2 million in restitution, and banned from operating any business in British Columbia for 15 years. Colton Properties was dissolved. The mansion was sold to pay legal fees and restitution. An empire built over 30 years collapsed in less than 6 months. Daniel and Sophie separated officially in December. She filed for divorce in January, citing irreconcilable differences. From what Daniel told me, she had grown bitter and resentful. She blamed him for not supporting her adequately through the scandal, apparently having decided that the appropriate response to her mother's victims was to mourn the loss of her sponsorship deals. The marriage had been over for longer than either of them had admitted. It had been over somewhere in those early months in Vancouver, when Daniel started losing clients and Margaret started making calls, and Sophie chose the angle of photograph over feelings of her husband. Last I heard, Sophie had relocated and was rebuilding her online presence around what she described as authentic vulnerability and personal reinvention. She had about 12,000 followers. Most of them, Daniel suspected, had tuned in to watch the spectacle rather than the content. Daniel stayed in Vancouver. He moved out of Sophie's condo and into a small apartment in a quieter part of the city. He started taking on small landscaping jobs. It was slow at first, the way anything real is slow at first. But word spread the way word does when someone does honest work with genuine skill. He called me last month with news that made me put down whatever I was reading and just listen with everything I had. He had landed a major contract, redesigning the outdoor spaces for a new cooperative housing development. City-funded, community-driven, completely above board. The developer asked me how I wanted to handle the contract. Daniel said, I told him full transparency, everything documented, everything legitimate. He paused. It felt good, Dad, to know it was all real. I'm proud of you, I told him. And I'm proud of you too, he said. You know that, right? For what? For protecting me. He said it simply, without drama. I know that's what the investigation was really about. You didn't do it purely for justice or to right some abstract wrong. You did it because someone was hurting your son, and you weren't going to let them keep doing it. He was right. I could dress it up. I could frame it as civic duty or moral obligation, or the rule of law. But the truth was simpler and more primal than any of that. Someone had humiliated my son in a room full of people, had made him feel small and worthless and less than, with the casual confidence of someone who believed their wealth and status made them completely untouchable. I had spent 35 years proving people wrong when they believed they were untouchable. Margaret Colton was just another case file. The only difference was this time, it was personal. I want to ask you something that I have thought about a great deal since all of this concluded. Is there a line between protecting the people you love and taking justice into your own hands? I do not think I crossed it. The evidence I gathered was real, it was documented, and I handed it to the institutions whose job it is to act on exactly that kind of evidence. But I think about the question. And I think anyone who has ever loved someone enough to do something difficult on their behalf has thought about it too. Tell me what you think in the comments. And keep listening, because the last part of this is the part one most want you to hear. I sold a house in the Beaches neighborhood last month. Too many rooms full of Carol. Too many mornings where I would walk into the kitchen expecting to find her there and find only the particular silence of a house that used to hold more life than it currently does. I do not say that with self-pity. I say it as a fact, the way I have always tried to deal with facts. What is true is true. What is gone is gone. What remains is worth tending carefully. I bought a small condo in Vancouver, close to Daniel's apartment. We have dinner together once a week, sometimes more. We talk about his work, about his plans, about the housing development project and the community garden he has been asked to consult on by the city. We talk about small things too, a documentary I watched, a book he is reading, the way the light changes over the mountains at a certain hour of the afternoon. We do not talk about Margaret much. She is serving her sentence. She will be eligible for early release in 20 months if she behaves herself, which strikes me as a generous arrangement given the scale of what she did. We do not talk about Sophie at all. Natalie, Sophie's younger sister, got married last summer. We were not invited. I noticed that Daniel mentioned it only in passing, the way you mentioned something that once would have stung, and now simply is what it is. Sometimes I find myself thinking about that moment in the Fairmont Ballroom, watching Margaret rise from her seat, watching Daniel's face absorb the blow, watching Sophie look away. I think about how different things might have looked if I had done what anger would have suggested, if I had stood up, if I had made a scene, if I had done what any father feels in the first raw second when someone makes his child feel worthless in front of 200 people. But I learned a long time ago, in 35 years of sitting across from people who believed they were too clever to be caught, that the most powerful thing in almost any room is not anger. It is not volume. It is not confrontation. It is information. It is knowing how to look at a pattern and see the truth underneath it. It is being willing to follow the trail patiently, without flinching, no matter how long it takes or how far it leads. Margaret Colton built her empire on the assumption that no one was paying close enough attention, that her fraud was small enough to go unnoticed, her corruption subtle enough to go unremarked. She was accustomed to people underestimating her because they were dazzled by the surface of things, by the wealth and the confidence and the apparent success. She made the mistake of underestimating me because I was quiet, because I was retired, because I spent my career investigating insurance claims, which is genuinely, I will concede, one of the less glamorous professions a person can pursue. Boring, maybe, but extremely thorough. And here is the thing that I find myself coming back to, sitting on my small balcony in Vancouver with a cup of tea and the mountains in the distance. Tell me in the comments. And if you've dealt with something similar, share your story. You're not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. Because I do not think this story is actually about Margaret Colton. I do not think it's about fraud or bribery or the machinery of justice grinding slowly toward an outcome. I think it is about something much simpler. I think it is about a man watching his son disappear, piece by piece, inside a relationship that had been built around making him feel small and deciding, quietly and without fanfare, that he was not willing to watch that happen. I think it is about what a parent will do when someone threatens their child. Not threatens in the dramatic, obvious way, but in the slow, subtle, daily way that is harder to name and harder fight, and does so much more damage over time. I think about Carol, about what she would have done in that ballroom. She would not have reached for a phone. She would have reached for Daniel's hand and said something that made him feel 10 feet tall in front of the entire room, because that was the gift she had that I never quite learned to replicate. But I had my own gifts, and I used them. The most dangerous person in a room is not always the one making the most noise. Sometimes it is the one in the back, watching, listening, remembering, taking very careful notes. Daniel called me last week, just to talk. No particular reason. He had finished a planning plan for the first courtyard of the housing development and wanted to describe it to me. The native grasses he had chosen, the way the seating was arranged to catch the afternoon light, the small things that would make the space feel like it belonged to the people who lived there. I listened for 20 minutes to my son talk about plants and light, and the way a well-designed space can make a person feel without knowing quite why, that they are exactly where they are supposed to be. And I thought, that is what I was protecting all along. Not his reputation, not his business, not even his marriage, his ability to be fully, completely, genuinely himself in the world, to talk about landscape architecture with that particular warmth in his voice, to care about whether the afternoon light lands correctly on a bench in a courtyard in a building he will never live in, to be the man his mother raised him to be. I think Carol would have approved of how it all turned out. I think she would have laughed at the image of me in a hotel ballroom, eating prime rib, quietly and methodically dismantling a criminal empire over email. She would have said, only you, Tom, only you would choose that particular moment to send that particular email. She would have been right. And she would have been smiling when she said it. The lesson in all of this, if there is one, is not complicated. Do not mistake quiet for weakness. Do not mistake patience for indifference. Do not assume that the retired man in the back of the room, the one with the boring career and the unthreatening manner, is not paying attention. He is. He has been paying attention the entire time, and never, under any circumstances, make his child feel small in a room full of people. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a parent can do is nothing dramatic at all. No confrontation, no raised voice, no scene, just an email sent on a Tuesday evening to the right people at exactly the right time.